Hi, and welcome to Real Talk Leadership Lessons from the Field. I'm Audrey George with Audrey George Consulting, and I'm here today with two of my favorite people. First, our co host, Chanita Jones. Chanita is a teacher, an organizational leader, and a new entrepreneur. And also our special guest, Kent Barnett, who's the CEO of Performativ and a longtime mentor of mine. Thanks so much to you both for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yes.
So let's just jump right in. Kent, let's share with folks, Shanita and our listeners, kind of what you're doing these days and how you got into your role.
So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Performativ, and we are a human capital analytics company. We actually measure investments in leadership and turn it into economics and actions you can take to improve anything related to human capital, whether it's your onboarding process, your hiring process, your leadership development, your sales training, mission critical skills, those sorts of things. And the way I got into it is I started out in the business world in finance and learned all about kind of analyzing financial investments. And then I got into the training and development space as an entrepreneur and then moved into the analytics space. So that's my background.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Sheena, could you share your background, please?
Yes, of course. So I am a teacher, as you said. Special education is my background. I recently started Light Bearers Institute so that I could expand on that. I learned in schools very quickly that the population that needed some education wasn't necessarily getting what they needed, and that is parents. And so I started Light Bearers Institute to supplement, to help close the gaps and repair some of the harm that's done through traditional systems.
Appreciate you sharing that, and thanks for the great work that you do.
Thank you.
So, Kent, this is your third business, right? You're a serial entrepreneur. Talk about how you decided to launch a business in the first place and your first go around.
So I worked at a large bank for like 8 or 9 years, and it was a great place to get started. And I moved into 2 or 3 different roles, but I realized that I really didn't want to work for a big organization. And I was actually playing tennis with a person I worked with, and her husband had started a company, a PC training company back in the 80s. And he made a comment to me about, why don't you come work for me? And I just flippantly said, give me a piece of the action, and I will. And we sat down and he gave me part ownership, and that's how I got into the entrepreneurial world. And then after that, I've started a couple of companies on my own.
Impressive, impressive. And Kent, like as an entrepreneur, as a leader for a long time now, there are some key challenges I think that we all face. I'd be interested in your thoughts around how do you plan your day? Like, how do you know what to spend your time on? There's so many competing initiatives, right, that we could all be focused on. How do you choose what you're going to do when you wake up every morning?
Well, that's a good question. I guess for me, I just think about like the most urgent things. I mean, I keep track, of everything that I need to do, like everybody else. But I don't know. I just focus on the 2 or 3 things that are most important, and I make sure I get those things done. And then I try to tackle everything else. I try not to get onto email too much. Email can be a huge distraction. I try not to respond to texts, all the time. I just find that, a lot of leaders could just sit there and respond, and leaders need to be thinking and prioritizing their work, in my opinion.
So creating opportunities for focus, kind of reducing distractions is key for you.
Yeah.
And when you say you prioritize kind of the most important things, how do you decide? How do you label what's most important? What are you looking at?
Well, I think, when you have your list and you kind of, we all have different techniques, right? I'm still an old guy. Like I like to use paper, and I like to write down the things I'm supposed to do. And then I kind of highlight the things that are most important to me. And then I kind of look at what needs to be, done sooner rather than later. And even if something isn't really critical, if I need to get it done today, then I put it up as a priority. So I think we all have kind of our own mechanisms for, having a list of to-do items, listing priorities, and then listing kind of timing. And, I sit down in the morning and I look at it and I make my priorities. And often I don't get through everything, but at least I make progress on the things that I feel are most important.
That's great. Shanita, how about you? What's your approach to managing your time?
So I have been doing a little bit more goal-oriented strategic planning, especially because I'm juggling still working a full-time job and building my business. And so in that, it is, my key priority for the quarter. What are going to be my levers for getting there so that I have some more short-term goals. And then every week on Tuesday, I kind of set, here are some 5 things I must do associated with this goal this week. And of course, I'm measuring myself the next Tuesday. How well did I do? But that's kind of how I identify my priority. And then I would agree with Ken with that in mind. Then I'm able to make my to-do list every day so that I'm like making some progress ongoing.
Okay, I have to ask, why Tuesday?
Tuesday is where I have the most availability in my day to do it consistently. And I have an accountability partner. And so we both kind of are able to sit down on Tuesday evenings and check in about the goals that we set so that we're able to not necessarily give ourselves the pass. I feel like sometimes in entrepreneurship, because you are only reporting to you, you don't necessarily have that fire as much. And so it's great to have an accountability partner. And so Tuesday is when we do it.
So say more about your accountability partner. How did you find this person and how do your interactions work?
So this is one of my close friends, somebody that I really trust. I feel like that was one of the most important things, and also somebody who's as ambitious as I am. I've had accountability partners all the time because for me it's very helpful. But sometimes if people aren't in the same place or you don't necessarily feel like it's a safe space, it's hard for it to be accountability. But I just offered it to her to support her, but it's been a really big support of me as well. And so we just kind of do it together because I tend to be really organized. Like I said, I have a strategy for goal setting, and sometimes it helps you stay accountable to it by having someone else. But my friend really asked me to support her with having some greater strategy as well.
So for somebody that's interested in this, could you break it down a little bit for people that were like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't I get an accountability partner? What would they do with that person? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it 3 hours? And then and how do your sessions work?
Yeah, so it started a little bit longer when you're coming up with the strategy and you want your partner, whoever your accountability partner is, to understand what's going on. But really, our sessions are about 20-30 minutes. Here was the target. Here's the 5 things I said I was going to do. Here is the data, right? I got 4 out of 5 things done this week. Or if I got only 2 out of 5 things done, then there's a process of like, why did that happen? Did you overcommit? We learned pretty early on that we really needed to calendar the thing. So really it's somebody to problem solve with, but you're really just reporting out on where you're going, having that person that you can bounce off ideas. Here's what we're doing next. And then again, kind of processing where you go wrong.
Okay, great tools that both of you are sharing for folks to learn from. Kent, how does that idea of an accountability partner land for you?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I've never thought of the term that way. I have standing meetings with like the two people my two most senior people in my business, and one of them is every Monday morning. And for me, like on Sunday nights, I just want to be home. I just want to like blank out. So that Monday morning for me, I get going. And so my chief operating officer and I talk every Monday morning. So that's kind of my timing. And I get your timing. So it's certainly, a personal thing, right? So for me, Sunday nights, I relax. Monday morning, I guess my accountability partner, I like the term, would be um, on Monday mornings. And then my chief technology officer and I talk every other week, um, just because it's, I guess, less about accountability, more about strategy. And so those are two things that I just have as standing meetings. Sounds like it's similar to Chanita.
Makes a lot of sense. I think there's an interesting piece that I've heard from folks. Some say that some leaders I've heard say they use Sunday nights as their like golden kind of space to like sit and be planful. And so when they kind of start Monday morning, they're ready to go. I'm more aligned with what your thinking is, Kent. Like I need Sunday nights to be on my couch, hopefully watching a basketball game and like letting my brain like do
Yeah,
its own thing because stuff's spinning in the background, but I just need to right?
yeah,
That's kind of like my exhale. And then Monday morning, let's go.
yeah,
Right. So but it's interesting because I've heard other people say they use Sunday night as like a key, that's the key to their whole week.
yeah.
So very interesting. And then Shanita's got the magic Tuesday night. So think
Yeah.
the point is it's whatever works for you, but finding your plan and your process. So I'd love to hear from both of you about this kind of process of decision making, right? As entrepreneurs, as leaders, you've got to make a ton of decisions every day, some bigger ones, some smaller ones. And in my experience, we don't usually have all the information we want to make those decisions, right? Kent, let's start with you. How do you approach decision making? When do you know that you have enough information to go forward?
Well, it's a tricky question. Can you ask Chanita first? I'm joking.
No.
I think that's the hardest thing as a leader. So, just to give you some examples. So, in my first business, we had a very successful, business. I came in as really uh, the president and kind of, chief operating officer, the day to day, and I worked for my mentor. And so there it had to be really collaborative, and I didn't have final say on a lot of things. He would
Mm,
give me final say, but I learned that I had to be really collaborative. And then my second company I started, I had total control. I was CEO and all that. But I also learned that, um, making decisions on my own without feedback was difficult. So one of the techniques that I learned was, come up with what I think is the right answer and just bounce off of people what they would do if they were me and they thought about it. And a lot of times, probably 90% of the time, they would confirm that my thought process was right, and that would give me confidence. And these are strategic decisions, right? Not
yeah.
day-to-day decisions. And they would kind of help me. And I learned that that was really a good technique. And then my third company, I'm the majority owner. I'm effectively the CEO, but I brought over 3 partners from my previous business. And I tried to really run it more as a partnership. And I found that there were times I should have made a decision that I didn't make, and I regret
Mm.
that. And so, kind of the lesson learned was, don't look for consensusship in decision making. If you're in charge, you're the CEO, you have final say. Make the decision you think is right. Get feedback, but make the decision.
And how would you think about making a decision too late? Like, how did you assess that? What made you say, oh, I waited too long? How did you realize that?
Well, I can give you an example. Um, in my second company, it's called Knowledge Advisors, and uh, again, it was really a learning analytics company, and we had strategic consultants that really helped us, and they made a big difference in our business. And when we sold that business, which was a very successful exit, and we started up Performativ, my current business, my partners really wanted to focus on selling technology. And I really felt that we should have also included really strategic consulting. And when I look back, I should have hired a strategic consultant about 3 years ago, and my
Mm,
shareholders would have been a lot better off. So that's an example. And then another one is um, we we debated for 2 or 3 years on whether we should make this technical investment, and we dragged our feet, dragged our feet. I dragged my feet as CEO, and finally, I just said, "Look, we're going to do this, okay?" And I had a lot of resistance. I still have a little bit of resistance, but I'm really glad I made that decision because I couldn't communicate effectively enough to the rest of the team about why we should do this. But I knew intuitively and based upon all my research that we should do it. And so sometimes, you just have to make those decisions. And we all make decisions that are too late. We all make decisions that backfire, and that's just life. I mean, you're gonna make poor decisions from time to time. Um, but CEOs just have to step up and do it, and it's tricky.
yeah, you bring up an important point. I think decision making might be the single most important role of a leader, right? And so to kind of know when to push things forward, know when to hold things back, that those are the levers we're pulling.
Right.
And it can be really tricky, and you have to be okay with failing. You have to be
Oh,
okay with being wrong somehow, and which I think none of us really are, right? Except for that we have to be. Shanita, how do you think about this? How do you think about decision making?
I I think that decision making, it depends on what I'm making decisions about. And I think that varies versus if I'm making decision for an entire team versus I'm making decisions for myself. And so I think one of the places where there's a crossover for me is I tend to make decisions based on my values. And so just having my very clear values and weighing every decision against that. So one of my values in work right now is love. If I would not love it, if it doesn't generate that, because I recognize that when I'm doing things for any other reason, it depletes me and it drains me. And then I'm not able to work in excellence, which is another one of my values. And so I always will stick those things at the top in my decision making. If it's something that's collaborative, it requires other people to do things. I do like to get buy-in. Generally, I really appreciate what Kent was saying about how sometimes you have to just say this is what we're doing and give it to people, and they like that level of clarity because they're indecisive. But somehow I like to also blend in how it aligns with their strengths, or so I think that's another value that I have, is just making things strengths-based, making decisions that way. So I haven't mastered it because sometimes I still fail, but I'm glad Kent is saying that that's something we have to do, because I definitely have questions about that.
I think this is a challenge that we all have, right? We want our people to be on board. We want to kind of feel like it feels like alignment, right? If we're in agreement, that feels like alignment, but that doesn't always mean that's the right path, right? I sit with leaders sometimes who, and I've done this myself, like get stuck in that quote unquote analysis paralysis, right? We can talk about this and look at options and kind of get more data and do more research ourselves all day long, but sometimes we got to pull the trigger, as they say, and move things forward. There's that kind of fail fast initiative or kind of mentality that folks have been talking about in the last few years. That's a term I've heard more. That doesn't necessarily apply in like a services oriented business. You don't want to like fail with your clients, obviously, but kind of trying new things and pushing things forward, even when we're not as comfortable as we might like to be, I think is literally one of the tricks of leadership. Shanita, questions that you have for Kent?
Yeah, I think along the lines of what we were just discussing, I feel, and the challenge for me as a new entrepreneur is the experimenting phase. So
Mm.
like I have a clear vision and mission in my mind, but trying to um, make that something that is sustainable and appealing and meet the needs of people in addition to my own needs. It's just that whole combination of things makes it challenging. And sometimes I just feel like I'm failing more frequently than I'm used to. And so I'm wondering, like, how do we do that gracefully? And how do you move through the experimenting phase? Is there a quick way where I could fail less frequently? Like, what's happening? Teach me, teach me.
Oh, I wish I had an answer for you. I think the reality is we all are going to fail, right? And um, uh, we go through phases when it takes a lot longer, and then we get into those phases where things are just clicking. Um, so I don't have great answers, just some thoughts. Uh, I think you call it experimenting or testing. A lot of lines of business they test things, right? In marketing they test it, and in a lot of fields they test it. And so if we have an idea and we're not 100% sure, is there a way we can test it and see if it works before we make big commitments? That helps. But the reality is we are going to fail. And I think that all the things we talked about before, alignment with the team, your point, Shanita, about working where people have strengths. I think a big role of a leader is developing our staff, right? And so helping our staff understand that how they can help us, how can they help us make better informed decisions. We don't want a lot of yes people, right? Good leaders have people who will speak up. And so if you have the right team, you trust them, you're aligned, you experiment, you don't, bet the ranch, right, on something you haven't proven. And, you just collaborate and communicate. And when you fail, if your failures aren't huge, then you stay in business and you keep moving ahead and you just get better and better at it over time. But I will tell you firsthand, I'm 67 years old and I haven't figured it all out. I have a lot of failures as I move ahead, but we keep plugging away and it works over time.
Mhm. Shanita, I would say if you're failing more quickly than you're used to and more often than you're used to, you are officially an entrepreneur and welcome to it. This is what it is. I will tell you, like in my experience, like sometimes it's just practice, right? things that I would have needed to get 98% ready 5 years ago when I started my business, I'm good moving at 70% now. Like,
Mhm.
I know that our 70% is really probably closer to 90%. And that also, like, that's good enough to move forward with most things, right? And I agree with Kent, like, we beta test a lot of things. If we're going to try a new approach to something or a new product, I'm a big fan of the beta tests. And then this is where I probably go the other direction. I would probably test maybe a little too off more than we should, because if we found a glitch and I want to get that fixed, and I want to test it 2 more times, which I think is the right way to do it. I might be holding myself back a little bit that way, but yeah, this is what it is. So you're doing it right, is my point. And
I
it'll get
appreciate.
easier. It'll get easier.
But I heard something that's really poignant, and this is how I anchor in my learning. So thanks for giving me space. But it's like you have to keep moving forward, even like don't stall too long, don't procrastinate. It may not be perfect, but you have to just persist and just keep on going. And so I'm gonna take that with me. And that's where I've been, but I'm like, am I in the right space? Like I'm just used to a little bit more stability and safety. So, but that is not entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Ken said earlier, in those cases that he waited too long to make those decisions, he pushed forward and like trusted his gut. I would say intuition is not overrated, right? When I've made kind of my biggest mistakes, it's when I've gone against my intuition. I thought I should do something and then I talked myself out of it. And so like you listen to yourself, right?
I agree. Well said by both of you.
Thanks.
Shanita, other questions that you have for Kent?
I think this is more leaning into your expertise now that I understand it a little bit better when it's about human capital. I feel like because I'm in the service business, it really is that is the asset. And I'm wondering what might be some key approaches to either management when you're working with a team or vendors or, potential partners or clients, just any tips for, I guess, having the best relationships and really maximizing the human capital, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think culture is a key aspect of it.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize for his work in human capital, and I had the pleasure of working with him and reading his book and all that. And it was pretty clear that culture is probably the most important thing in a business.
Mhm.
So when you select vendors, when you hire people, when you make business decisions, culture matters, and each company has a different culture, and so that is something I think that a lot of people don't grasp. They look more at data and facts and those things, but all that research centered around culture. So if you're going to hire people, are they culturally aligned? If you train and develop them, his work said, don't just do generic training, train and develop them consistent ways that are consistent with your culture. You talked about your values. Make sure you reinforce those values. As leaders, we have to reinforce and we have to demonstrate it. So to me, that's a key aspect.
Appreciate that. I think that's really important as I think about because I'm one person and I'm developing curriculum that can be utilized. I'll have people who are able to take the curriculum, but one of the things is you can't just get the curriculum and do it. You have to be able to do it like I would do it. And so I think that that's a culture piece that's important, which means a little bit slower than, I would. Well, I won't say that I would like a little bit slower than expected. It's a very intentional pace, I guess, that is required in building in that culture. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think intentional pace is the right thing. Invest just a little bit more time in your hiring process. Invest a little bit more time in your coaching. Invest just a little bit more time, to make sure you're making the right decisions. In my first company, we had a very, very successful CEO on our board. He was a lot older than me, and he made the comment. He said, hiring is a crapshoot. It is. So we're going to hire people. We're going to make mistakes, and so take a little bit more time. Try to make sure they're the right people. But one of the biggest lessons learned is if you made a mistake in the hire, correct it sooner rather than later, because it can cause a lot of damage.
Hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah, and that's true with vendors. That's true with, anybody you work with.
Yeah, if people aren't a fit, they're not gonna all of a sudden become a fit, right? I
Right.
think we feel like we made a commitment to someone or to ourselves or made a plan, and maybe we can just try a little more and make it work. I've never once heard a leader say, I wish I would have taken longer to let that person go. Like not one time, right? It's always the opposite. Like
Yeah,
I knew 6 months ago, I knew a year and a half, and it's like long periods of time usually.
right.
And
Yeah,
so to just, again, that's like, if the person's not a fit and we make mistakes, right? We make
yeah,
mistakes. And I think, Sinead, you asked about kind of developing quality relationships. And I think just honesty is so key, right? Honesty and integrity and just being real with people. And I think if you sat down with somebody that wasn't working out, it's not working out for them either. Right? Like, so if you sit down and say, hey, I'm assuming you're thinking the same thing, like this isn't the fit we thought it was going to be, right? And you just kind of get real with folks and don't try to necessarily sugarcoat it. And then on the flip side, when people are doing well or when you think you can kind of help somebody develop even further, being honest with them about where you'd like to see them go, being honest with them about hearing from them what they're interested in, right? Kind of if you want to bring somebody in to develop your sales pipeline, but they're really interested in the service delivery, those things aren't going to mesh very well. You've got to be honest about what you need, and they do too, right? So I don't think this is any different than any other relationship that you have. Like the more honest and kind of direct you are, the more likely it is you're going to get what you want out of the situation and that you're going to understand what you're really dealing with. And that so is the other person, right? To me, it's a gift. You both know me. Like, let's just talk about it. Let's just put it out on the table. And then we all know what we have and what we're dealing with. That is harder to get from most people, though. You asked me what I think I'm going to tell you. I'm told that's not very common, right? And so kind of figuring out how to create a space where people are comfortable saying what they think. Ken, you mentioned before kind of the importance of people disagreeing, right? That not kind of, you don't just want people to agree. But yeah, that's a culture piece. Like Kent's created a culture of feedback where people know they can come to him and say, hey, I don't think we're doing this right. I think we could be doing this thing better, right? Without fear of retribution of some kind, without him scoffing or somehow punishing them or ignoring them, right? And so when you're honest, that creates a space for other people to be honest too, even when it's hard, if that makes any sense.
yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, Shanita, go ahead.
I have one more question. So, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice, especially when starting up your first business, what advice would you give a new leader, a new entrepreneur?
Hmm. Uh, well, that's a tough question for me. I mean, in my first business, I got lucky. I ended up with somebody who I admired and trusted. Um, uh, we did almost go out of business, though, so I guess that would be the lesson. We acquired a company. We acquired a company in New York, and my CFO kept saying we shouldn't do it, we shouldn't do it, we shouldn't do it. And I think I was too stubborn. And when I look back, he was so determined about it, and he was right. Um, so I guess the answer for me would be, when I'm just starting, if it's, I'm just becoming an entrepreneur, and somebody feels really strongly, and um, I didn't pay close enough attention, it almost put us out of business. We rebounded. We were very successful, but boy, life would have been a lot easier if I had like been more open to his feedback.
It's a great answer. Mine would be twofold. Trust yourself, first and foremost. You know who you are, you know what you've got in you. Like, follow that, go with it. And then two, find your thought partners. Like, I think your accountability partner sounds fantastic. Also, find your thought partners and don't be afraid to lean on them. Kent, as I mentioned at the top of this, has been a mentor of mine for many years. And I don't know if he could count the number of times I've called to say, hey, can you think through something with me? Can I think out loud about this with you? And he'd always have just really great insights, kind of like in this conversation that we're having now, right? So imagine if you had Kent to go to and say, I have this idea. I'm not ready to talk to people about it yet, but I want to know what you think. Here's where I'm, and I'm sure he's rolling his eyes like, here we go again.
Oh, no, it's a two-way street, though. I learned too in the conversation. Janine, if I can help you, don't hesitate to contact me. Seriously.
I appreciate that, and I will take you up on it.
Great.
Yeah, and I would say, right, like I think there's a whole network of folks you can lean into, officially and unofficially. I think there's plenty of people online even that if you like what somebody's doing and you reach out to them and say, hey, I really like what you're doing here. Would you mind, giving me 20 minutes to pick your brain about something? I'd be surprised if most people didn't say yes to that. So don't be
Yeah.
afraid to ask though for that. I
Yeah.
think we can to these spaces where we think we have to figure it out on our own. And that's just not, no one ever has done that. That's not real.
And I would also say, the whole concept of pay it forward is there because he can help you, but it really is a two-way street. We all learn by talking to each other. We do this, this has been helpful for me. Like you just kind of, have these conversations and you're open to it and you realize that you're making the same mistake you did 20 years ago, right? So these conversations help all of us.
Absolutely agree. I'm going to wrap us up with two questions that I'm going to ask of both of you. Ken, I'm going to come to you first with this one. What's the best leadership advice you've ever been given?
The best leadership advice I've ever been given. Well, it came from my mentor, Tim Preheim, and I think the one word that I took away was integrity. Like, have integrity in everything you do.
Chanita, how about you?
This is wide and vast, but the thing that is echoing in my head right now is this is the second time you've told me don't be afraid to ask for help. And so I think that is what I'm missing. And I think that that's the best advice for me right now moving forward. So I have to go with that. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, final question. Kent, back to you. Is there a mantra or like a saying or like a thing that you tell yourself? Is there something that you live by? Anything on your wall? Anything you keep on your screensaver? Or anything that's just in the back of your head that you pull out when you need it?
Luck is the residue of design.
Ooh, say that again.
Luck is the residue of design.
Luck is the residue of design.
I didn't make it up, but it hit me, and I've kept that's kind of been my mantra, I guess.
Yeah, appreciate that. Chanita, final word. What about you?
Lately, it is when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, which is I love is one of my values. And so I'm holding on to that.
Truth, absolutely. Completely agree with both of those. Well, I just want to say thanks to you both so much for doing this. I've learned a lot. Really appreciate you sharing your time and your insights with each other and with our audience. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Kent. I learned so much. I'm very grateful.
All right.
All right,
I'm
take care.
thankful too. Thank you. All right. Bye.